Hey everyone, I've noticed that many of you are enjoying the videos, but most of you haven't subscribed yet. We're super close to hitting 1,000 subscribers, and your support could help us reach that milestone. If you're enjoying the content, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It really makes a huge difference and helps us keep creating more awesome content. Thank you so much for watching and supporting. The hiss of the espresso machine broke the morning silence as I poured myself a cup of black coffee. Steam curled lazily upward, filling the kitchen with a bitter, familiar aroma. I sipped and glanced at the clock, 6:45 a.m., right on time. My routine was always predictable, a series of small rituals that kept the day structured and my mind steady. Vanessa's heels clicked sharply against the hardwood floor, a staccato rhythm that echoed through the quiet house. I turned to see her walk in, dressed in a tailored navy dress that clung to her figure. Her hair was pinned up meticulously, not a single strand out of place. I frowned, a flicker of something unsettling twisting in my gut. She looked stunning, radiant even, more like she was heading to an elegant dinner party than just another day at her office job. She caught me staring and shot me a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Early meeting today?" I asked casually, taking another sip. She shrugged, her eyes flitting away. "Yeah, something like that." Something like that. The phrase felt off, a vague answer meant to deflect. I didn't press, but a faint, almost imperceptible scent of perfume wafted over as she brushed past me. Chanel number 5, a fragrance she used to reserve for special occasions. I hadn't smelled it on her in months. A tiny seed of suspicion took root. My gaze lingered on her as she moved through the kitchen with a practiced ease, pouring herself a glass of water. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe it was just stress. Or maybe, just maybe, there was something more to it. I set the coffee down, my fingers tightening around the ceramic handle. "Do you want to have dinner together tonight? It's been a while since we just talked." Vanessa paused, her hand hovering over the counter, as if the idea of a simple dinner was some alien concept. She glanced at me, her expression unreadable. Then just as quickly, she smiled. A strained, polite smile that made my skin prickle. "Maybe," she said, already looking away. "I'm not sure what time I'll be back. It might be late." Might be late, again. Lately, everything seemed to be happening late. Late nights at the office, late dinners alone, late excuses that never seemed to add up. The seed of doubt buried itself deeper, sprouting roots that twisted around my thoughts. "Sure, no problem," I murmured, forcing a smile of my own. Vanessa nodded absently and drifted toward the door. I watched her leave, a faint sense of loss blooming in my chest as the door clicked, shut behind her. A cold emptiness spread through the kitchen, and I felt like I was standing in someone else's house, living someone else's life. Something was wrong. No, something had changed. The rest of the day blurred past in a haze of spreadsheets and muted conversations. My focus wavered, slipping away from client portfolios and investment strategies, always circling back to that morning, to the look in Vanessa's eyes, distant and hollow, to the scent of a perfume that no longer seemed meant for me. By the time I returned home, it was already dark. Vanessa's car was absent from the driveway. I stepped into the house, the silence pressing down on me like a weight. There was a time when this place felt warm, filled with laughter and shared moments. Now it was just a shell, echoing with memories that felt distant and unreachable. I wandered aimlessly through the rooms, pausing at the mantel where our wedding photo sat, her smile bright, her eyes alight with something I hadn't seen in a long time. A pang of something sharp and bitter twisted inside me. I shook my head, turning away. My gaze drifted to the dining room table, where Vanessa's phone usually lay charging, plugged into the wall socket. It was gone. I moved to the kitchen, checking the counter. Nothing. I tried to dismiss the tightening in my chest as paranoia, a figment of my imagination conjured up by too much time alone. But when I entered the bedroom, the sight of the half-empty bed sent a jolt through me. I couldn't remember the last time we'd gone to bed at the same time. Something had changed, and not in the gradual way that happens in every long relationship. This was sudden, deliberate, Like a page turned too quickly in a book, I stared at her side of the bed, sheets neatly tucked, pillows fluffed. She didn't even leave an indentation in the mattress anymore. The days passed with more tiny discrepancies piling up. A meeting that ran an hour late, a credit card charge at a restaurant I'd never heard of. Vanessa's phone, once carelessly tossed around, now guarded like a precious artifact. The distance between us widened, her presence in the house like a ghost drifting through rooms, barely leaving a trace. One night, as we sat across from each other at the dinner table, I tried to bridge the gap. "How's work been?" I asked, keeping my tone light. She barely looked up from her plate. "Busy." "Busy how?" Vanessa's fork clinked against her glass, a small, irritated sound. "Just busy, Lucas. You know how it is." No, I didn't know how it was. Not anymore. There was a wall between us, and she was hiding behind it, keeping me out. Every question, every attempt to connect, bounced back with the same dismissive ease. I watched her, searching for any crack, any clue that might give me a glimpse of what lay on the other side. But Vanessa was perfect, polished, impenetrable. One evening, I found myself standing outside her office building. I told myself I'd just drop by, surprise her with dinner. But when I saw her walk out with a man I didn't recognize, tall, sharply dressed, his hand brushing the small of her back, I froze. They laughed, the sound muted through the glass of my car's window. She leaned into him, her smile genuine and warm, a smile I hadn't seen in months. My stomach twisted, a cold, sick feeling churning inside. I watched as they walked to a sleek black car, her hand resting lightly on his arm. He opened the passenger door for her and she slid in, graceful and poised. The car sped away, taillights disappearing into the night. I sat there gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, the truth staring back at me in stark, brutal clarity. Something in me snapped, a delicate thread pulled too tight, finally breaking. When I finally drove home, I felt like a different man, an empty man. The world I'd built, the life I thought was mine, crumbled beneath the weight of realization. I wasn't losing her, I'd already lost her. And she hadn't even bothered to tell me. By the time Vanessa returned home that night, late of course, I was already in bed, feigning sleep. I heard her move around quietly, almost guiltily, slipping off her shoes and padding softly to the bathroom. The click of the light switch, the rustle of clothes. Then she was beside me, the mattress dipping slightly, her back turned to me, her breathing slow and steady. But I couldn't sleep. My thoughts raced, heart pounding, with a strange, simmering rage. The seed of suspicion had grown into something dark and twisted, its roots digging deep into my chest. I lay there staring up at the ceiling, a single thought coiling through my mind. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. I spent the next week carefully observing Vanessa's behavior. Everything felt heightened now, my senses attuned to every word, every glance, every subtle shift in her tone. The atmosphere between us was tense, thick with unspoken accusations and questions neither of us dared to voice. I started noticing more than just the occasional late meeting or unexplained expense. There were other tells, small, seemingly insignificant details that, when taken together, painted a much darker picture. Vanessa's friends, the ones who used to greet me with warm smiles and open arms, seemed more guarded now. When I ran into them at a mutual acquaintances gathering, I felt a chill in their demeanor, a coldness disguised behind polite conversation and forced laughter. They avoided eye contact, their smiles too tight, their questions about Vanessa and me laced with an awkwardness I couldn't ignore. "Vanessa's been keeping busy, huh?" One of them, Laura, mentioned offhandedly. Her voice was casual, but I could hear something else beneath it. An edge, a hint of sympathy, but sympathy. "Yeah," I replied, watching her carefully. "Work's been demanding." "Right," she said, glancing away. I saw a flicker of pity in her eyes before she masked it with a bright, strained smile. "I guess that's why she hasn't been around much lately. You know, with us, girl stuff and all." "Of course," I murmured, but something tightened in my chest, a bitter seed of anger and doubt. There it was again. Another vague comment, another deflection. What weren't they telling me? Did they know? And if they did, how long had they been keeping this secret? I left the gathering early, driving home with my thoughts swirling like a storm. Every conversation, every glance exchanged between Vanessa and her friends played back in my mind, twisting into something ugly and accusatory. Maybe it was just paranoia. Maybe I was overthinking. But that look in Laura's eyes, that fleeting hint of something between guilt and sympathy, I couldn't shake it. When I got home that night, I found Vanessa on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She glanced up, her expression shifting from mild annoyance to that same distant smile she always wore now. "You're home early," she remarked, not really asking. I shrugged, forcing a casual tone. "Yeah, it wasn't much fun without you there." She didn't respond. Just turned back to her phone, her face illuminated by the blue glow of the screen. The silence stretched, awkward and heavy. I watched her, searching for any sign of guilt, any crack in the mask she wore so effortlessly. But there was nothing. Vanessa was an enigma, a closed book that I was no longer allowed to read. Days bled into one another, each one filled with more half-truths and evasions. Vanessa's work trips seemed to extend indefinitely. She'd leave early, come back late, and slip into bed without a word. I tried to initiate conversations to bring up the growing distance between us, but each time she brushed me off with a practiced ease. "It's just work, Lucas. Why are you making such a big deal out of this?" "Because you're lying to me, because I know something's wrong." But I never said the words aloud. I was still holding on, desperately clinging to the fragile hope that I was wrong, that it was all in my head, that everything wasn't falling apart. One evening when Vanessa claimed she'd be at an off-site meeting until late, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my keys, heart pounding with a mixture of dread and determination, and drove to her office building. I parked a few blocks away, the city lights casting long shadows across the deserted street. From my spot, I had a clearer view of the entrance. Hours passed. My pulse thrummed in my ears, each second ticking by in agonizing slowness. Then finally I saw her. Vanessa stepped out, laughing softly as she leaned into a man I'd never seen before. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that screamed money and influence. They stood close, too close, his hand resting lightly on her waist, fingers brushing the fabric of her dress. I watched, frozen, as he leaned in and whispered something in her ear. Vanessa laughed again, a genuine, carefree sound that felt like a slap to my face. It was a laugh I hadn't heard in months. My stomach churned, a sickening realization settling in. She looked at him the way she used to look at me, that same bright, attentive gaze, filled with admiration and something more, something intimate. I watched as they walked toward a sleek black car parked nearby. He opened the passenger door for her, his hand lingering on her back as she slid in. The car pulled away, merging into the flow of traffic, disappearing into the night. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to follow them, to confront her, to do something. But I didn't. Instead, I sat there staring blankly at the empty street, a hollow ache spreading through my chest. The next few days were a blur of anger, disbelief, and self-loathing. I oscillated between wanting to confront Vanessa and telling myself to hold back, to think this through. Confronting her would lead to nothing but denials and arguments. She was too smart, too composed. I needed something concrete, something she couldn't twist or talk her way out of. That opportunity came one night when Vanessa's phone buzzed with a notification. She was in the shower, the sound of running water masking the soft chime. I hesitated for a moment, then reached for the phone, my heart hammering in my chest. The message was from an unknown number, but the words cut through me like a knife. "Can't wait to have you all to myself this weekend. Love, T." Everything inside me stilled. I stared at the message, the reality of her betrayal crashing down with brutal finality. It wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It wasn't in my head, this was real. The room seemed to tilt, the edges blurring as I fought to keep myself from spiraling. When Vanessa emerged from the bathroom, toweling her hair dry, I was already back in bed, staring blankly at the ceiling. She glanced at her phone, picked it up, and turned her back to me, fingers moving rapidly over the screen as she typed a reply. I lay there motionless, my heart a leaden weight in my chest. She didn't even try to hide it. That night, I barely slept. Rage and hurt twisted inside me, every fiber of my being screaming for some kind of release. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. I needed more. I needed to see just how far this betrayal went. Over the next few days, I became a ghost in my own life, drifting through the motions while silently gathering evidence. I trailed Vanessa discreetly, noting every time she left the office to meet with him. I took pictures, collected receipts, every scrap of proof I could find. It was painstaking work, every moment driving a new splinter of pain deeper into my soul. But I kept going, methodically, meticulously. One night, after she'd gone to bed, I sifted through her phone records and credit card statements. The number from the text showed up repeatedly, along with a string of unfamiliar locations, fancy hotels, upscale restaurants, places she'd never gone with me. I felt numb as I stared at the screen, the truth staring back at me in stark, undeniable clarity. My wife was having an affair. And it wasn't just a fleeting thing. It was real. It was deep. It was everything I had feared. The weight of it all pressed down on me, suffocating and relentless. I stood there in the darkness of our bedroom, staring at Vanessa's sleeping form. Her face was serene, peaceful, as if she hadn't shattered our lives into 1,000 jagged pieces. I wanted to shake her awake, to scream, to demand answers, but I didn't. Instead, I turned away, my chest heaving with silent, bitter rage. This wasn't the end. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. She had betrayed me in the worst possible way, and I was going to make sure she felt every ounce of the pain she had inflicted on me. I walked out of the room, leaving her to sleep in the bed we once shared, a bed that now felt foreign and tainted. My mind raced, thoughts spiraling and coiling into something dark and unyielding. She thought she could deceive me, lie to me, and walk away unscathed. She was wrong. I'd make her pay for this. Every lie, every deceitful whisper. By the time I was done, Vanessa would regret ever thinking she could destroy me. The days that followed were a blur of methodical planning. My mind, once consumed by the whirlwind of anger and betrayal, shifted into something cold and analytical. I forced myself to look at our life like I would a client's portfolio, dissecting each detail, each piece of shared history, until it all became nothing more than a series of assets and liabilities. I needed to strip the emotions away if I was going to do this right. I spent hours replaying our entire relationship, pinpointing every moment I might have missed, every crack in the facade Vanessa had built around us. There were times years ago when I would have sworn she loved me, when her smiles were genuine, her touches lingering. But had she ever really loved me? Or had it always been part of a careful act? Each time I thought I found a glimmer of something real, something that could explain her betrayal, it slipped away, leaving me more determined than ever to make her pay. I couldn't erase the image of Vanessa's face when she was with him, laughing, carefree, as if our entire life together meant nothing. But instead of allowing that rage to consume me, I used it. I funneled every ounce of it into a singular purpose, destroying her, piece by piece, just as she'd destroyed me. I started by looking into every financial detail of our life. I was a consultant after all, numbers were my language. Vanessa had always left the finances to me, never bothering to check balances or question expenses. She assumed I'd handle everything, and I did, for both of us. What she didn't realize was that it left me in control of everything. First, I examined our joint accounts. The one we used for household expenses, the emergency fund, even her own personal accounts. All of it fell under my scrutiny. Slowly, carefully, I began siphoning funds. Nothing drastic enough to draw attention, just small amounts at first, shifting money into a private account she didn't know existed. The satisfaction of seeing those numbers dwindle was bitter and hollow, but it fueled me. Next, I closed our joint credit cards, canceled them without a second thought. I imagined the shock on her face when she tried to use one at some overpriced boutique or restaurant. Good. Let her feel a fraction of the humiliation she'd put me through. I called the bank and altered the permissions on our accounts, making sure only I could access or alter them. Each action felt like taking another step down a dark, irreversible path. But I didn't care. This was my war, and I was going to win. One evening, I waited until Vanessa left the house for another one of her work trips. As soon as the front door closed behind her, I slipped into our shared home office. I knew I had a limited window before she would inevitably come back, phone in hand, some new excuse already prepared. I needed to make sure I had everything lined up before she realized what was happening. I logged into our mortgage account, staring at the numbers that tied us to this house. Our home, no, my home now. I made a few adjustments, transferring the title solely into my name. Vanessa had never been one for paperwork or legalities. She'd probably signed every document I'd put in front of her without a second glance. Now, it was going to bite her. The satisfaction was fleeting, though. I knew I wasn't dealing with just Vanessa. That man, Thomas. I didn't know much about him yet, but what I'd seen told me enough. He had money, power, and connections that went beyond what I was used to handling. If I was going to dismantle Vanessa's life, I needed to be prepared for his interference. The next step was gathering information on him. I reached out to a private investigator I'd used a few times for clients needing quiet background checks. Discretion was key, and I didn't want to risk any trace of this coming back to me. The PI's voice on the other end of the line was calm and professional, as always. "Lucas, what exactly are we looking for here?" he asked after I gave him the basics on Thomas. "Everything," I replied flatly. "I need to know who this guy really is, where his money comes from, and what skeletons he's hiding. If he's so much as got a parking ticket in college, I want to know." "Understood. I'll get started right away. But if he's as connected as you say—" "I don't care how connected he is," I cut him off, the edge in my voice surprising even me. "I just want results." A few days later, the PI came back with the file thicker than I expected. I stared at the manila envelope, my hands trembling slightly as I opened it. What I found inside changed everything. Thomas wasn't just rich, he was dangerous. His wealth was tied up in a series of shell companies, offshore accounts, and businesses that didn't exist on paper. And there were whispers too, murmurs of ties to organized crime, of blackmail and extortion. His influence wasn't limited to just money. He was a man accustomed to getting what he wanted, using whatever means necessary. For a moment, doubt crept in. Had I gone too far? Was I in over my head? But then I thought of Vanessa's laughter as she leaned into him, the way she looked at him like he was the center of her world. The doubt evaporated, replaced by cold resolve. This new information didn't scare me, it was an opportunity. If Thomas thought he could muscle me out or buy Vanessa's way out of this mess, he was in for a surprise. I'd dismantle everything down to the last penny, but I needed to be careful, methodical. One wrong move and he could crush me. I shifted my focus back to Vanessa, refining my approach. If I attacked her finances head-on, she might turn to Thomas for help. I had to make her think she was alone, isolated. I made sure her credit score plummeted by canceling every line of credit associated with her name. I paid off the small loans she'd taken out, ones I'd let slide for her own little luxuries, so I could cancel them as well. With each account closed, her financial stability crumbled a little more. And then I made the final move. I drained our joint savings account. It was money we'd set aside over the years. Vacation funds, emergency cash, everything that had represented our shared future, our plans together. I transferred every last cent into my own account, leaving just enough to keep it open so she wouldn't get a warning from the bank. Let her see for herself what she had left when she decided to check. Each night I watched her closely, waiting for the realization to dawn on her. But she remained blissfully unaware, still too caught up in her affair to notice what was happening right under her nose. Then one morning it happened. Vanessa's shriek echoed through the house, sharp and piercing. I was in the kitchen, pretending to read the paper, when she stormed in, her face pale and eyes wild. She held her phone out like it was a bomb about to go off. "Lucas, what the hell is this?" she demanded, shoving the screen in my face. It was a message from the bank, alerting her to the sudden drop in our savings. I looked at her, feigning confusion. What are you talking about? The savings account, she hissed, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. It's almost empty. Where did the money go? I set the paper down, meeting her gaze calmly. I moved it. What? She blinked as if she couldn't process the words. Why would you? Because it's my money now, I said quietly, watching as the blood drained from her face. Just like everything else, she took a step back, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. You can't just... I can, and I did, I cut her off, the cold satisfaction spreading through me as I saw the fear finally register. And that's just the beginning, Vanessa. By the time I'm done, you'll be left with nothing. Her mouth opened and closed, shock rendering her speechless. She stumbled back, clutching the phone as if it were the last lifeline she had. I almost felt pity. Almost. But then I remembered everything. Her betrayal, her lies, the way she looked at Thomas. The pity vanished, replaced by the grim pleasure of knowing she was finally feeling a fraction of what I'd felt. You think you can go running to him? I asked, voice dropping to a whisper. Thomas isn't going to help you. In fact, he'll probably run as soon as he realizes what a liability you've become. I watched her shudder, the reality of her situation dawning on her. There was no safety net, no one she could turn to. Everything she'd relied on was gone, and I was the one holding all the strings. Good luck, Vanessa, I murmured, turning away. You're going to need it. And with that, I left her standing in the kitchen, alone and broken. The first step of my plan had worked. Now I just had to see it through to the end. Vanessa stood in the center of our kitchen, trembling with rage. I could see her mind working furiously behind those wide, disbelieving eyes, desperately searching for a way out. But I'd planned for this, prepared for every possible move she might make. Do you really think you can just take everything, she spat, her voice laced with a brittle edge of panic. You can't do this, Lucas. I'll go to the bank, to the police. Go ahead, I replied evenly. And what will you tell them? That your husband, who's been the sole provider and manager of your finances, decided to keep the assets he's legally entitled to? That won't get you very far, Vanessa. The truth hit her like a slap. I watched her swallow hard, her bravado faltering. Every escape route she considered would lead to a dead end. She was trapped, and she knew it. What about Thomas? She blurted out, a flicker of defiance lighting up her face. Thomas? I laughed softly, shaking my head. The man who's been funneling money through shell companies and bribing local officials? You think he'll come to your rescue? Let me show you something. I pulled out my phone and opened the document folder the private investigator had compiled on Thomas. I scrolled through pages of incriminating evidence, transactions, emails, and wire transfers that painted a vivid picture of his dirty dealings. Vanessa's eyes widened as I held the phone in front of her. What is this? She whispered, her face paling even further. This is everything your precious Thomas has been hiding. I have enough here to bring down his entire empire. All it would take is a single call to the right people, and he'll be behind bars, his assets frozen, his connections turned against him. I saw the fear bloom in her eyes, turning her defiance into something closer to desperation. She glanced away, shoulders slumping, the weight of her own predicament sinking in. Don't worry, I added casually. I haven't sent it to anyone. Not yet. But if he tries to meddle, if he so much as sets foot on my property or threatens me in any way, well, let's just say he won't be a problem for long. You're bluffing, she whispered, voice hollow. Try me, I replied, holding her gaze steadily. See what happens. For a long moment, we stood there locked in a silent battle of wills. Vanessa, once so composed and unflinching, now looked fragile, as if one more word would shatter her completely. She took a shaky breath, and for a second I thought she might crumble right there. But she rallied, lifting her chin stubbornly. Why? She asked quietly. Why are you doing this? Why? I repeated, incredulous. Because you thought you could tear apart our life, my life, and walk away unscathed. You laughed at me, Vanessa. You flaunted him, paraded your betrayal like some twisted trophy. I won't let you get away with it. I never wanted this, she cried, her voice breaking. I, I was just trying to what? Humiliate me? Destroy everything we built? My voice rose, all the fury I'd kept contained spilling out. What was the point, Vanessa? Was it worth it? I was lonely, she shouted, the words bursting out of her like an admission of guilt. You were so caught up in your own world, your work, your obsession with the control. You didn't even see me anymore, Lucas. I felt invisible. Her confession hit me like a punch to the gut. But I didn't flinch. I couldn't afford to. Don't try to twist this, I warned, voice cold and steady. You made your choice. You chose to go behind my back, to lie, to cheat. Whatever excuses you have don't matter anymore. She bit her lip, tears gathering in her eyes, but I didn't soften. She needed to feel the full weight of what she'd done. I turned away, a wave of disgust washing over me as I looked at her. This woman I'd once loved, now reduced to a shell of the person I thought I knew. I've already contacted the realtor, I said over my shoulder. The house will be listed by the end of the week. The house? Her voice was small, choked with disbelief. You're selling our house? My house, I corrected, turning back to face her. You signed it over to me, remember? That's one less thing for you to worry about. Her hands flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. She looked around as if the walls themselves were closing in on her. This place, once filled with memories, with laughter and shared dreams, was now slipping away, just like everything else. I didn't feel a shred of pity. What am I supposed to do? She whispered, more to herself than to me. Where am I supposed to go? I stepped closer, lowering my voice so she had to strain to hear. I don't care, but I suggest you figure it out. Because by next week you'll have nothing left. She stumbled back, tears streaming down her face now. For a moment I thought she might collapse, but she straightened, a flicker of stubborn determination igniting behind the tears. Thomas will do nothing, I snapped, cutting her off. Don't you get it? He doesn't care about you, Vanessa. You were just a diversion, someone to pass the time with. But now that you're more troubled than you're worth, he'll drop you like a bad investment. You don't know that, she murmured, but her voice lacked conviction. I know him better than you think, I replied. And I know exactly how to make sure he wants nothing to do with you. I watched as the hope drained from her eyes, replaced by a hollow, empty stare. I'd won, and we both knew it. But instead of feeling triumphant, I felt tired, exhausted. This wasn't the victory I'd imagined. It was just another step in a long, brutal process. I'm giving you a choice, I said quietly. Leave now, take what little you have left, and don't look back. Or stay and watch as I destroy everything you've ever cared about. Because I will, Vanessa. I will burn it all to the ground if I have to. She stared at me, disbelief warring with resignation. Slowly she nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. It was over. The fight was gone from her eyes, replaced by a dull acceptance. I'll go, she whispered finally, voice broken. I'll go. Good, I murmured, stepping back to give her space. That's the smart choice. She moved slowly as if each step cost her an immense amount of effort. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the kitchen. I stood there listening as her footsteps echoed down the hallway, the front door opening and closing behind her with a quiet final click. I waited, the silence of the house pressing down on me like a weight, and then I exhaled, a long, shuddering breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. She was gone, truly gone. Everything I'd worked for, all the pain and bitterness had led to this moment. Vanessa was out of my life, and I was free. So why did it feel so empty? I walked through the house, glancing at the remnants of our life together, the framed pictures, the small mementos that seemed meaningless now. I should have felt satisfaction, a sense of closure, but all I felt was a strange, hollow ache. The anger that had sustained me for so long was gone, leaving a void I didn't know how to fill. In the living room, I paused, staring at a photo of us on our wedding day. We looked so happy, so full of hope. I remembered that day vividly, the way she'd laughed, the way she'd looked at me like I was the only man in the world. Had that been real? Or had it all been a lie even then? I clenched my jaw, forcing the thoughts away. It didn't matter anymore. She was gone. I'd done what I needed to do. But as I stood there, alone in the empty house, I couldn't help but wonder if I'd destroyed more than just Vanessa's life. I'd destroyed the past, the future, and everything in between. And now there was nothing left. Nothing but the quiet echo of a life that no longer existed. I reached for my phone, scrolling through the contacts until I found the realtor's number. My thumb hovered over the screen for a moment, then I pressed down, bringing the phone to my ear. "Hello, Lucas." The realtor's voice came through, bright and eager. "List it," I said softly, staring at the photo one last time before turning away. "List the house." "Of course, I'll take care of everything." I hung up and slipped the phone back into my pocket. The house, the memories, Vanessa, it was all in the past now. I needed to move forward. But as I walked through the empty rooms, each one echoing with the ghost of what used to be, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed in me. Revenge had given me purpose, focus, but now that it was over, I felt lost. I'd won the war, but at what cost? I took a deep breath, forcing myself to step out the front door and lock it behind me. The air outside was crisp, the sun setting on what felt like the end of an era. I turned my back on the house, my house, and walked away, each step taking me further from the wreckage of the life I'd once known. The past was over. Now it was time to figure out what came next. I arranged the meeting at our house, the one Vanessa used to call our forever home. It felt like the appropriate setting for the final chapter of our story. The walls that had witnessed our happiness and heartbreak would now bear witness to her downfall. I chose the time deliberately. Dusk, when the light outside was fading, casting long, eerie shadows across the empty rooms. The atmosphere matched my mood, dim, heavy, expectant. Vanessa arrived precisely on time, a shadow of the woman she once was. Her hair, usually perfectly coiffed, hung limply around her face. She wore no makeup, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow, as if sleep had eluded her for days. She looked almost sickly, like a ghost drifting through a life that no longer belonged to her. "Lucas," she murmured, voice strained, as if it hurt to say my name. "Why are we meeting here?" "I thought you'd moved out." "I wanted to give you one last chance," I replied coldly, closing the door behind her. I didn't bother with niceties or preamble. She wasn't here for a reunion or reconciliation. This was business. She glanced around, taking in the stripped walls and barren shelves. The absence of our shared possessions seemed to hit her hard. The house, once filled with signs of our life together, was now stark and empty. The air between us vibrated with tension. "I already agreed to leave town," she said softly, almost pleadingly. "You have everything. You won. So why drag this out?" "Did I win?" I asked, stepping closer. "Or am I just trying to make sense of the ruins you left behind?" "I want answers, Vanessa. Real answers. Not excuses or deflections. I want the truth." She flinched at the demand, glancing away as if searching for some escape. But there was none. I had her cornered, the predator closing in on its prey. "What more do you want from me?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "I've already lost everything." "Not everything," I corrected, watching her carefully. "Not yet." She took a deep breath, steadying herself. I saw something shift in her eyes, a flicker of defiance, of the old Vanessa who'd once been so strong and self-assured. She squared her shoulders, meeting my gaze with a steadiness that surprised me. "What do you want to know?" she asked quietly. I felt a strange surge of emotion, anger, grief, maybe even pity. But I pushed it down, burying it beneath the cold mask of indifference I'd perfected over the last few months. "When did it start?" I asked bluntly. "And don't lie to me, Vanessa. I have nothing left to lose." "You, on the other hand—" She hesitated, then sighed, a long, shuddering breath that seemed to drain her of whatever fight she'd had left. "A year ago," she admitted. "It started a year ago." I felt a pang, but I kept my face impassive. With Thomas? She nodded slowly, biting her lip. It was stupid at first. Flirting, drinks after work. I didn't think it would go anywhere. I didn't even want it to, but it did. And by the time I realized how deep I was in, it was too late. Why? The words slipped out before I could stop it, carrying more weight than I'd intended. It wasn't just about the affair. It was about us, about everything we'd built, everything I thought we'd shared. Vanessa's face crumpled. You were gone, Lucas, she said softly. Even when you were here, you weren't here. You were obsessed with your work, with your own perfection. You stopped seeing me, stopped listening. I felt like I was disappearing, piece by piece. Bullshit, I snapped, the sudden fury searing through me. I was there, Vanessa. I loved you. Everything I did for us. For us? She repeated bitterly. Or for the version of us you created in your head, the perfect marriage, the perfect life. There was no room for me in that world, Lucas. Not the real me, the flawed, messy, human me. I clenched my fist, forcing myself to breathe. Her words stabbed at something raw inside me, something I didn't want to acknowledge. So you turned to him. Why Thomas? What did he have that I didn't? Attention, she said simply. He gave me attention. He made me feel seen, wanted. He listened when I talked. He didn't expect me to fit some perfect mold. With him, I could just be. I stared at her, disbelief warring with rage. And what about now, I asked, voice low and dangerous. Where is he now, Vanessa? Where's the man who gave you all that attention? She looked away, her expression crumpling. He's gone. He left. After everything happened, after you exposed his dealings, he cut ties. Said I was too much of a liability. The satisfaction I felt was fleeting, chased away by a hollow emptiness. I'd expected it, but hearing it confirmed still felt like a twisted kind of victory. I'd torn them apart, driven a wedge between them. But now what? Good, I said flatly. He was never going to be your savior, Vanessa. You were just a toy to him, a convenient distraction. But I suppose you know that now. She nodded miserably, tears spilling down her cheeks. I know. I've lost everything, Lucas. Him, the house, my friends, even my reputation. I have nothing left. Nothing but the truth, I murmured, my voice softening despite myself. So tell me, was it ever real? Us? Or was it all just another game? Her gaze shot up, startled by the question. For a moment, she just looked at me, her eyes searching mine, as if she were trying to find something, some remnant of the man she'd once loved. It was real, she whispered. In the beginning, it was real. I loved you, Lucas. I loved the life we built. But somewhere along the way, we got lost. I got lost. The confession hit me like a punch to the gut, the truth of it reverberating through the silence. She meant it. I could see it in the way her shoulders sagged, the way her gaze dropped to the floor, as if she couldn't bear to look at me any longer. And now? I asked quietly. What do you want now? I want to disappear, she murmured, voice breaking. I want to leave this place and never look back. There's nothing for me here anymore. No one. You made sure of that. I stared at her, the woman who'd once been everything to me, now reduced to this shattered, broken figure. I'd wanted to see her suffer, to watch her world crumble around her, but now that it had happened, all I felt was a bitter, hollow ache. I'd gotten my revenge. I'd taken everything from her, just as she'd taken everything from me. But standing here looking at her, I couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, I'd lost more than she had. I'm giving you one last chance, I said quietly, every word deliberate, final. Leave town, sever all ties, and never contact me again. If you try to come back, if you try to drag me down with you, I'll make sure you regret it. I'll destroy you completely, Vanessa. Do you understand? She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. I understand. Good. I took a step back, creating distance between us. Get out. Leave the keys. Don't look back. Vanessa moved slowly as if every step took all the energy she had left. She reached into her purse, pulled out the house keys, and set them on the counter. Her hand lingered there for a moment, trembling, before she finally turned and walked toward the door. She paused at the threshold, glancing over her shoulder one last time. "I'm sorry, Lucas," she whispered, voice thick with regret, "for everything." I didn't respond. I just watched as she walked out the door, the sound of her footsteps fading away into the night. She was gone. For a long time, I stood there in the empty house, staring at the door she'd left through. I should have felt relief, satisfaction, something. But all I felt was a profound, aching emptiness. I'd won. I'd destroyed her life, just as she'd destroyed mine. But as I looked around the hollow, empty house, I realized something that chilled me to my core. I wasn't free. I was as trapped by the past as she was. The house, the memories, the life we'd shared, it was all gone. But the scars remained, etched deep into my soul. And no amount of revenge would ever erase them. With a heavy heart, I turned off the lights and locked the door behind me. As I stepped outside into the cool evening air, I took a deep breath, staring up at the night sky. Vanessa was gone. The house would be sold. My life, as I'd known it, was over. Now it was time to figure out what came next. After Vanessa left, a strange stillness settled over me, the kind that seeps deep into your bones and lingers, leaving a chill that no amount of warmth can chase away. The house felt like a tomb, silent and empty, filled with the ghosts of a life that no longer existed. I stood in the darkness for what felt like hours, staring at the door she'd walked through. This was what I wanted, wasn't it? To see her broken, defeated, paying for every lie, every betrayal. I'd torn her world apart, just as she'd done to mine. I should have felt satisfaction, but all I felt was lost. With a heavy sigh, I shook myself out of the haze and moved through the house one last time. Room by room, I forced myself to look at each space to let the memories come, good and bad. The kitchen where we'd cooked together, arguing playfully over recipes. The living room where we'd spent lazy Sundays, wrapped in each other's arms, talking about the future. The bedroom that had witnessed both our passion and our disintegration. I walked into the empty office, the place I'd turned into the war room for my revenge. The laptop I'd used to unravel Vanessa's life sat closed on the desk. I hadn't touched it since I set the final plan in motion, like a gun I'd fired once and then discarded. I sank into the chair, staring at the blank screen, wondering what I was supposed to do next. I'd planned everything meticulously, down to the last detail, but I'd never considered what would happen after. What did you do when you reached the end of a road that led nowhere? The silence stretched, pressing down on me until it was almost suffocating. With a growl of frustration, I pushed away from the desk, grabbed my jacket, and left the house. Outside, the air was crisp, carrying the scent of approaching winter. The stars twinkled above, indifferent to the turmoil churning inside me. I drove aimlessly through the city, the familiar streets blurring past. Every corner seemed haunted by memories of Vanessa, restaurants we dined at, parks we'd strolled through, places that had once meant something. Without realizing it, I ended up at the waterfront. I parked and walked to the edge of the pier, staring out at the inky black water, listening to the soft lapping of the waves. I felt raw, exposed, as if every nerve was on fire. Everything I believed in, everything I'd held on to had been stripped away. Who was I now? What did I have left? The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I was alone, completely, utterly alone. I reached for my phone, scrolling through the contacts. I hadn't spoken to anyone, friends, family, in months. I'd isolated myself, consumed by the need to exact my revenge. But now that it was done, the emptiness was unbearable. My finger hovered over my brother's name, Ben. He tried reaching out a few times, but I'd ignored him, too focused on my plan to respond. I hesitated, then hit the call button. The phone rang once, twice, then clicked as he answered. "Lucas?" Ben's voice was laced with surprise. "Is that really you?" "Yeah," I murmured, my throat suddenly tight. It's me. Jesus, man. I was starting to think you'd disappeared off the face of the earth. What's going on? I glanced at the dark water, the reflection shimmering under the moonlight. I don't know, I admitted quietly. I think I needed some time. Ben's silence stretched across the line, then he sighed. Look, I know things have been rough, especially after what happened with Vanessa, but you don't have to go through this alone. I'm here, okay? We all are. I swallowed hard, a knot forming in my chest. I I know, I just didn't want to didn't want to talk to anyone until I dealt with everything. And have you? He asked gently. Dealt with it, I mean. I let out a bitter laugh, running a hand through my hair. I thought I had. I thought getting revenge would fix everything. But now I'm not so sure. Revenge doesn't heal wounds, Lucas. It just digs them deeper. You know that, right? Yeah, I whispered, my voice barely audible. I know that now. Come over, he urged, his voice warm, insistent. Just for a bit. We'll talk. Or not talk. Whatever you need. But don't stay alone tonight. I hesitated, then nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Okay, I'll come over. The relief in his voice was palpable. Good, I'll be waiting. I hung up, slipping the phone back into my pocket. I stayed by the water for a few more minutes, letting the cool air clear my head, then headed back to the car. When I arrived at Ben's place, he pulled me into a tight hug, clapping me on the back. About damn time you showed up, man, he said with a grin. I managed a small smile, the tension easing just a fraction. Yeah, I guess I've been a bit of a recluse. A bit? He teased, then gestured for me to come in. Sit down, I'll grab us some beers. I sank onto the couch, the familiar comfort of his home wrapping around me like a blanket. Ben returned with 2 bottles, handing me one. We sat in companionable silence for a while, sipping our drinks, until he finally broke it. So tell me, what happened? I took a deep breath, then told him everything, about Vanessa's betrayal, the months of planning, the revenge. I laid it all out, sparing no details. He listened without interrupting, his expression grave. When I finished, he let out a low whistle. Wow, that's intense. Yeah, I muttered, staring at the bottle in my hands. It was. And now? Now, she's gone. The house is going up for sale. It's over. He studied me, his gaze thoughtful. But it doesn't feel like it's over, does it? I shook my head, the knot in my chest tightening. No, it doesn't. I thought getting back at her would make everything better, but I don't feel any better, Ben. I just feel empty. He nodded slowly. Because you were so focused on hurting her, you forgot to heal yourself. The words hit like a slap, the truth of them sinking in. I'd been so consumed by anger, by the need for retribution, that I'd neglected the part of me that needed to heal, to move on. What do I do now? I whispered, feeling more lost than ever. You start over, Ben said simply. One step at a time. Reconnect with people. Find a new place, a new purpose. It's not going to be easy, but you're strong, Lucas. You'll get through this. Yeah, I murmured, though doubt still gnawed at me. I guess. Look, it's not about forgetting what happened, he continued gently. It's about accepting it and letting it be a part of your past, not your present. You can't change what Vanessa did, but you can decide how it affects the rest of your life. His words stayed with me long after I left his place that night. Over the next few weeks, I took his advice to heart. I reached out to old friends, explaining my absence, reconnecting with the people I'd shut out. Some welcomed me back with open arms. Others were more hesitant, unsure what to make of the man I'd become. But I took it one step at a time, slowly rebuilding the connections I'd severed. I sold the house. Watching it go felt like closing a painful chapter. I found a new place, smaller, quieter, somewhere I could start fresh. I even sought out a therapist, someone who could help me untangle the mess inside my head. It was hard at first, dredging up everything I'd buried, but with each session, I felt a little lighter, a little more in control. Time passed, and bit by bit, the wounds began to heal. The anger, the bitterness, they didn't disappear, but they lost their hold on me. I started to see Vanessa's betrayal for what it was, a tragedy, yes, but not the end of my story. Just one chapter in a much longer book. One afternoon, I found myself standing in front of the new house, keys in hand. It was modest, nothing like the sprawling place Vanessa and I had shared, but it was mine. A place without shadows, without memories, a place where I could build something new. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past finally start to lift. The air felt different, lighter, freer. I walked up to the door, unlocked it, and stepped inside. It was empty, but it didn't feel cold or lonely. It felt like a blank canvas. The possibilities stretched out before me, endless and unknown. For the first time in a long while, I felt something close to hope. The man I was before Vanessa's betrayal, he was gone. But in his place, I'd become someone stronger. Someone who'd face the worst and come out the other side. I was still finding my way, but I was moving forward, and that was enough. I turned, looking out at the world beyond my new threshold. The future was uncertain, but it was mine. I took a deep breath, then stepped forward, leaving the past and Vanessa behind. As I closed the door behind me, I felt it. The first stirrings of peace, a new beginning, and this time I was ready for whatever came next.